Why did Israel get the land in the first place? So I know this is controversial as for the things happening, and I don't quite know if this is the right place to ask, but I searched like all of the internet and never gotten any good answer to this. I know that there were Jewish settlers in that area for quite a long time, and they discussed different options like Uganda. But why did it have to be Palestine except for religious reasons? It seems like they were trying to force themselves into a region for the reason their ancestors lived there for a couple of hundred years 3,000 years ago, like that would legitimize any claims for any country for any people in the world. Also, I read that the Uganda plan was dismissed because the Zionists didn't want the opportunity to establish a state in Palestine to vanish. This kind of has a bitter taste, as they didn't seem to be happy with any other option than their promised land. So why exactly did it have to be Palestine? Am I missing out on something? The defeat of the Ottoman Empire resulted in about 15 new countries being carved out of MENA. The opportunity was there, not in Utah or Madagascar or wherever. The Allies promised Palestine its freedom during WW1 in order to get them on their side in fighting the Ottomans. They also promised it to the Jews to both A, get those in the US to support the war, and B, get those in Russia to not drop out of the war. It was, however, added that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Needless to say, no one could have foreseen that it wouldn't work out, because Turkey Ottoman Empire was on the wrong side in First World War. After the war, the British took control and, in coordination with the United Nations, its predecessor, technically established the State of Israel. As both sides have a very equal historical claim, the blame here is on Britain, who made a variety of promises about what to do with the worthless land at the end of World War I. By the end of the next war, they were finally ready to divest, and sympathies were running high for the Jews at that point. It was all divided up in a pretty haphazard way. As with India and Pakistan, add in some failed Arab wars against the nascent Israeli nation. Yada yad. And here we are. You answered your own question. There were alternatives, but Zionists always wanted to live in what they believe used to be the Kingdom of Israel, and especially in Jerusalem. And the political dominoes fell the right way that they were able to accomplish that. Most Jews in Israel are actually from the Arab countries surrounding Israel. Once the Arab ethnically cleansed, then they lost the claim of why are they here. UN Mandate of 1948. Before that, the British Palestine Mandate from the League of Nations era, and even the Ottoman Empire allowed Jewish people to live in the areas the Romans banished them from. Britain usually gets tagged, but while there were some pro-Zionism administrators, Winston Churchill soured on it as WW2 raged. By the time of the UN mandate, the UK opposed it, but in no position to do anything except evacuate due to war weariness. No real mandate to stay, etc. Anti-Semitism. Europe and the US didn't want Jews in their countries, so Great Britain just said, here is some desert land we own that they have some historical attachment to. Presto blammo. Israel was born. Very TLDR. Except for religious reasons? Why do Arabs have control over the Temple Mount? What is their claim to Jerusalem? Oh right. Religious reasons. The reason why Palestine is exclusively for religious reasons. In the late 1800s, Zionism took off. The idea that Jews are owed the land promised to them by God. After WW1, Britain started working with the WZO, other prominent Zionists, to encourage Jewish immigration to Palestine. I do recommend the book The Shortest History of Israel and Palestine, From Zionism to Intifadas and The Struggle for Peace by Michael Scott Bowman, as it covers a lot of the preamble to the British Mandate, various backers of Israeli statehood. If I was a global superpower in decline, and some group of fanatics are willing to do my work against my ideological rivals for free, of course I would help them. Let project power for me. Ancestors is a stretch, lol. The West wanted to put the Jews somewhere, but didn't want them in Europe or the US. The current country of Israel was actually their fourth choice. They tried to get Uganda, Argentina, and Madagascar first. Once their eyes were set on the region that would become Israel, the UK armed, trained, and funded them, and the Nakba began. Same reason the Crusades chose Palestine. By the rivers of Kampala, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Uganda doesn't have the same ring to it. Because God said, people are religious nuts and want to be in a cult. The West transferred their guilt to the Arabs and stole their land, plain and simple. 1-3 people in the British Mandate were Jewish and tensions were high pre-1948. Giving the entire area to a Jewish or Muslim state would have been far more horrific than the reality we ended up with. That area had been occupied since the Babylonians, then Romans, then Arabs, then the British Empire. The British Empire owned it and gave it to the Jews. If you look at British primary sources, it was mostly because in the 1890s Jerusalem was 65 Jewish and most areas in the northwest of Israel were 90 Jewish. Conquest, it's just conquest. The Jews lived in Israel thousands of years ago. Palestinians came later. Fun fact, that was known as Judea until the Romans decided to cancel culture the Jewish people. It has been the home of the Jews for thousands of years. Which is why there are so many ancient Jewish artifacts and archaeological sites there. Those didn't just show up in the last 100 years. It was given to them by God. We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. Nelson Mandela, Free Palestine. Well, there's a long, convoluted explanation that I'm sure someone will cover. The Cliff's Notes version is the Brits felt sorry for the Jews and drew some lines on a map that the guy who drew the lines had never actually been to the place where the lines were being drawn. So, in short, blame the Brits. Similar story for the creating of Iran and Iraq.